Chapter 1: The Gift of Adigun. The village of Oke-Aja lay in the embrace of the rolling hills, its thatched roofs peeking out from a sea of green. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sounds of the forest, where the trees whispered ancient secrets. It was a place where the past lived alongside the present, where the ancestors' spirits were never far away, watching over the living from the shadows of the trees. In this village lived a boy named Adigun. He was a quiet child, often found alone at the edge of the village, staring into the depths of the forest. His mother, Adigun, worried about him, for he was not like the other children. While they played and laughed, Adigun was drawn to the silence of the woods, where the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional cry of a distant animal. Adigun had always felt different. He sensed things others did not, shadows that moved without cause, voices that whispered on the wind, but he kept these feelings to himself, for he feared what the others might say. The villagers were kind, but cautious. They respected the unseen forces that governed their lives, but they also feared them. And they feared those who claimed to see beyond the veil between the living and the dead. One day, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Adigun ventured deeper into the forest than he had ever gone before. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches twisted into strange shapes. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by an eerie stillness. Adigun's heart pounded in his chest, but he was not afraid. Something called to him, a voice that was both familiar and foreign. It drew him forward, guiding his steps until he reached a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient tree, its roots spreading out like the fingers of a giant hand, clutching the earth. As Adigun approached the tree, the air around him shimmered, and a figure began to materialize before him. It was the shape of an old man, his form translucent but solidifying with each passing moment. The man's face was lined with age, his eyes deep and knowing, as though they had seen the birth and death of countless generations. Adigun froze, his breath caught in his throat. He had heard tales of the spirits that lived in the forest, but he had never believed them. Yet here, standing before him, was proof of those stories. "Do not be afraid, child," the old man said, his voice echoing as though it came from all directions at once. "I have been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Adigun asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Adigun, you are the one who can hear us, the one who can see beyond the world of the living." The old man smiled, a warm, comforting gesture that eased the tension in Adigun's chest. "You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" Adigun asked, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "To be the bridge between the living and the dead," the old man replied. "It is a rare gift, passed down through the ages to only a few. You will be able to speak with those who have passed, to seek their guidance and learn from their wisdom." Adigun's mind raced. The thought of speaking to the dead was both thrilling and terrifying. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not someone else?" "Because you have the heart and the spirit for it," the old man said. "You are strong and you are kind. The spirits have watched you since you were a child. They see the potential within you, the power that you do not yet understand." Adigun felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling of acceptance and understanding. For the first time in his life, he felt that he belonged, that his differences were not something to be ashamed of, but a sign of something greater. The old man stepped closer, placing a hand on Adigun's shoulder. "But with this gift comes great responsibility. You must use it wisely, for the spirits can be both helpful and harmful. They are bound to the will of those who call upon them. Remember this, Adigun. The dead have much to teach, but they also have much to protect." "I will remember," Adigun said, his voice filled with determination. The old man nodded, pleased with Adigun's resolve. "Good. Now, go back to your village. Your journey is just beginning. There will be challenges ahead, but know that you are never alone. The spirits will be with you, guiding your steps." With that, the old man began to fade, his form dissolving into the air like mist. Adigun watched in awe as the clearing returned to its previous state, the ancient tree standing silent and still. As Adigun made his way back to the village, the sun had disappeared, replaced by a blanket of stars. The forest seemed different now, alive with the knowledge of what lay beyond the world of the living. Adigun felt a sense of purpose he had never known before, a connection to the land and its history that was as deep as the roots of the ancient tree. He knew his life would never be the same again, but as he stepped out of the forest and into the village, he also knew that he could not yet reveal his gift. The time would come, but until then, he would keep the secret close, learning and growing until he was ready to face the challenges that awaited him. And so, Adigun returned to his mother's hut, his heart filled with the knowledge of the unseen world and the weight of the responsibility that had been placed upon him. He was no longer just Adigun, the quiet boy who wandered the forest. He was Adigun, the bridge between the living and the dead. Chapter 2. The Village's Crisis. The village of Oke-Aja awoke to a stillness that was unusual for the bustling community. The birds that usually sang at dawn were silent, and the air felt heavy, as though a dark cloud had settled over the land. The villagers went about their morning routines, but there was an undercurrent of unease that no one could ignore. Adigun sensed it too. Since his encounter with the spirit in the forest, he had felt more attuned to the world around him, noticing subtle changes that others might overlook. He could feel the tension in the air, the unease of the land itself. Something was wrong. It wasn't long before the source of the problem became clear. The crops in the fields began to wither, their leaves turning yellow and brittle. The once thriving plants that provided food for the village were now dying, and no one could explain why. The villagers tried everything, watering, tending the soil, even praying to the gods, but nothing worked. As the days passed, the situation worsened. People began to fall ill with strange, unexplainable ailments. The village healer, a wise woman named Iya Orun, was baffled. The herbs and remedies that had always worked before were now powerless against the sickness spreading through Oke-Aja. Fear gripped the village. The elders, who had seen many hardships in their time, were at a loss. They gathered in the meeting hut, their faces etched with worry, as they debated what could be done. "This is not a natural illness," said Baba Esu, the oldest of the elders. His voice trembled as he spoke, a rare sign of vulnerability. "The land itself is rejecting us. We must have angered the spirits." "But how?" asked one of the younger elders, his voice tinged with frustration. "We have kept the traditions, honored the ancestors. What could we have done to bring this upon ourselves?" The elders fell into a heavy silence. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Meanwhile, Adigun watched from the shadows, unnoticed by the others. He had always been invisible in these meetings, too young to be considered, too quiet to draw attention. But now he felt a tug in his chest, a pull that urged him to do something. The words of the spirit from the forest echoed in his mind. "You are the one who can hear us, the one who can see beyond the world of the living." Adigun knew what he had to do. That night, while the village slept, he crept out of his mother's hut and made his way to the sacred grove where he had first encountered the spirit. The moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground as he walked. The grove was silent when he arrived, the trees standing tall and ominous in the darkness. Adigun took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest, and closed his eyes. He reached out with his mind, calling to the spirits. "Please," he whispered, "I need your help. The village is in danger. The crops are dying and the people are sick. I don't know what to do." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the air began to shift, and the familiar shimmer appeared before him. The spirit of the old man materialized once again, his expression grave. "You have done well to come here, Adigun," the spirit said. "The village is indeed in great danger. The land is cursed." "Cursed?" Adigun repeated, his voice trembling. "But why? What have we done to deserve this?" The spirit sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. "Long ago, your ancestors made a covenant with the earth spirits. In exchange for the land's fertility and protection, they agreed to honor the spirits with a ritual every generation. But over time, the knowledge of this ritual was forgotten. The covenant was broken." Adigun's heart sank. He had heard stories of ancient pacts and agreements, but he had never imagined that such a thing could be real. "Is there a way to fix it?" he asked. "Can the curse be lifted?" "There is a way," the spirit said, his voice low and solemn, "but it will not be easy. The ritual must be performed to restore the balance. It requires a deep connection to the earth and the spirits, something that has been lost to your people. You must learn the old ways, Adigun. You must become the one who bridges the gap between the living and the dead. Adigun felt a weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than anything he had ever known. The responsibility was immense, and he was just a boy. But he knew he had no choice. The village was counting on him. "I will do it," Adigun said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "I will learn the ritual. I will restore the balance." The spirit nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You are brave, Adigun, but bravery alone will not be enough. You will need guidance, wisdom, and strength. The journey ahead will be long and difficult, but I will be with you, as will the spirits of your ancestors." With those words, the spirit began to fade, leaving Adigun alone in the grove once more. But this time he did not feel afraid. He felt a sense of purpose, a determination that burned bright within him. As he made his way back to the village, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. The village still lay in the grip of fear and uncertainty, but Adigun knew that hope was not lost. He would learn the old ways, he would perform the ritual, and he would save his people. For now, though, he had to keep what he had learned to himself. The villagers were not yet ready to hear of the curse or the covenant. They would not understand. But in time, when the moment was right, he would reveal the truth. Until then, Adigun would continue to listen to the spirits, to learn from them, and to prepare for the trials that lay ahead. The fate of Oke-Aja rested on his young shoulders, and he was determined not to fail. Chapter 3. The Journey to the Underworld. The days in Oke-Aja grew shorter, the sun dimming behind a veil of ominous clouds that seemed to have taken permanent residence over the village. The once lush fields were now barren, and the people were weak from hunger and sickness. A heavy sadness had settled over the village, but amidst the despair, Adigun held on to the knowledge given to him by the spirits. He knew what he had to do, but the path ahead was unclear. One evening, as the village was shrouded in twilight, Adigun sought out Iya Orun, the village healer. She was the only one who might understand the things he had to say, the only one who might believe him. The elderly woman was sitting by a small fire outside her hut, grinding herbs with practiced hands when Adigun approached. "Iya Orun," Adigun began, his voice low but steady. "I need your help." The old woman looked up, her sharp eyes studying the boy before her. She had always sensed something different about Adigun, something that set him apart from the other children. "What troubles you, child?" she asked, her voice gentle. Adigun hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I've spoken to the spirits," he said. "They told me the land is cursed because of a broken covenant. There is a ritual that must be performed to lift the curse, but I don't know how to do it." Iya Orun's eyes widened slightly, but she did not dismiss him as he feared she might. Instead, she leaned closer, her expression serious. "The old ways," she murmured, almost to herself. "I had heard tales from my grandmother, stories of ancient pacts made with the earth spirits, but I never thought, what must be done?" "The spirits say I need to journey to the underworld," Adigun replied, "to learn the ritual from the ancestors. But I don't know how to get there." Iya Orun nodded slowly, her mind working through the possibilities. "There is a place," she said after a moment, "a sacred grove deep in the forest, where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. It is said that those who enter with the right intentions can cross over into the spirit world." "Will you show me the way?" Adigun asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "I will," Iya Orun said. "But you must understand, Adigun, the journey to the underworld is dangerous. It is a place of spirits, both kind and malevolent. You must be prepared for what lies ahead." "I am ready," Adigun replied, his voice filled with determination. "I have to do this, for the village." The next morning, before the first light of dawn, Adigun and Iya Orun set out for the sacred grove. The forest was thick and dark, the trees towering above them like ancient guardians. As they walked, Iya Orun spoke in hushed tones, instructing Adigun on the rituals he would need to perform to enter the underworld safely. "The underworld is not like the world we know," she explained. "Time moves differently there, and the spirits are unpredictable. You must keep your wits about you, and remember, they will test you. Only those with pure hearts and strong spirits can return." Adigun listened carefully, absorbing every word. He knew that this journey would not only test his physical strength, but his will and spirit as well. The forest grew denser as they ventured deeper, the trees closing in around them. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the sacred grove lay hidden. In the center of the grove stood an ancient tree, its roots twisted and gnarled, its bark covered in strange symbols. The air was thick with a palpable energy, as if the very ground was alive with the presence of the spirits. "This is where you must go," Ia-Orun said, stopping at the edge of the clearing. "Beyond this point, I cannot follow. You must go alone." Adigun nodded, steeling himself for the task ahead. He stepped into the clearing, feeling a sudden chill as he crossed the threshold. The air seemed to hum with an otherworldly resonance, and the light around him dimmed, as though the sun itself was afraid to enter this sacred place. As he approached the ancient tree, Adigun could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him, the spirits of the grove watching his every move. He knelt before the tree, placing his hands on the ground, and began to chant the words Ia-Orun had taught him. The language was old, its meaning lost to time, but Adigun spoke it with reverence, feeling the power of the words as they resonated in the air. The ground beneath him began to tremble, and the symbols on the tree's bark glowed with an eerie light. The world around him blurred, the colors bleeding into one another until all was darkness. Adigun felt as though he was falling, sinking deeper and deeper into the earth until finally he landed with a soft thud on solid ground. He opened his eyes to find himself in a place that was both familiar and alien. The landscape resembled the world above, but everything was muted as though a heavy fog lay over the land. The trees were twisted and dark, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the sky was a dull gray expanse with no sun or stars to guide him. Adigun took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew he was in the underworld now, the realm of the dead. The air was thick with the presence of spirits, their whispers swirling around him, carrying fragments of forgotten memories and lost dreams. He began to walk, his steps echoing in the silence. The path before him was unclear, and the underworld seemed to shift and change with every step, as though it was alive, testing him. Adigun could feel the weight of the spirit's gaze upon him, judging his every move. As he ventured deeper, Adigun encountered his first challenge. A river appeared before him, its waters dark and still, reflecting nothing but the void above. He knew from the stories Ia-Orun had told him that this was the River of Memories, a place where the spirits of the dead came to remember their past lives before crossing into the afterlife. Adigun approached the river cautiously, knowing that he would need to cross it to continue his journey. But as he neared the water's edge, a voice called out to him, soft and melodic. "Adigun." He turned to see a figure standing on the opposite shore, a woman with a familiar face. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized her, his grandmother who had passed away when he was just a child. "Grandmother?" Adigun whispered, tears springing to his eyes. "Yes, my child," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "It has been so long. Come to me, Adigun." Adigun took a step forward, but then hesitated. Something wasn't right. The stories Ia-Orun had told him came rushing back. Spirits in the underworld could take any form, even those of loved ones, to deceive the living. "Are you really my grandmother?" Adigun asked, his voice trembling. The woman smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I am a memory, Adigun, a reflection of your love and loss, but I am also a test. To cross this river, you must let go of the past. Only then can you move forward." Adigun felt a deep ache in his heart, the pain of letting go, but he knew she was right. He could not cling to the past if he was to save his village. With a heavy heart, he bowed his head and whispered, "Goodbye, grandmother." The woman's form shimmered, her features softening into a gentle light that drifted across the river, guiding Adigun to the other side. The waters parted before him, and he crossed safely, the light of his grandmother's memory fading into the distance. The journey continued, each step more difficult than the last. Adigun faced challenges that tested his courage, his wisdom, and his resolve. He encountered spirits that tempted him with promises of power, others that tried to scare him away with visions of his deepest fears. But Adigun remained steadfast, driven by the knowledge that the fate of his village depended on him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Adigun arrived at the heart of the underworld, a vast and eerie expanse filled with the spirits of the departed. The air was thick with their presence, a chorus of voices rising and falling like the tide. At the center of this expanse stood a great throne, carved from the bones of ancient ancestors. Seated upon it was the spirit of the old man who had first appeared to Adigun in the forest, his form more solid and imposing here in the underworld. "Welcome, Adigun," the spirit said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have done well to reach this place, but your journey is not yet complete. There is still much you must learn before you can restore the balance." Adigun stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that would determine the fate of Oke-Aja. "I am ready," Adigun said, his voice filled with determination. The spirit nodded, pleased with Adigun's resolve. "Then let us begin," he said. Chapter 4, The Ritual of Redemption. Adigun returned to Oke-Aja with the dawn, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the ancient ritual. As he walked through the village, he noticed the changes that had taken hold in his absence. The fields were now barren, the once vibrant huts appeared dilapidated, and the villagers moved like shadows, their faces gaunt and weary. The sickness that plagued the village had taken its toll, and Adigun knew there was no time to waste. He made his way to the elders' meeting hut, where the village leaders gathered daily to discuss their dwindling options. When Adigun entered, the elders looked up, their eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The young boy who had always lingered on the periphery now stood before them with an air of quiet authority. "Adigun," Baba Esu said, his voice laced with concern. "Where have you been? The village is in dire need, and we feared you had fallen ill like the others." "I have been to the underworld," Adigun replied, his voice steady. "I have spoken to the spirits and learned the ancient ritual that can lift the curse from our land. We must act quickly if we are to save Oke-Aja." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. They had always respected the old traditions, but the idea of a young boy venturing to the underworld and returning with the power to save them seemed beyond belief. "You claim to have spoken with the spirits?" Baba Esu asked, his tone skeptical yet hopeful. "And you believe you can lift this curse?" "I know I can," Adigun said firmly. "But I cannot do it alone. The ritual requires the participation of the entire village. We must all come together to restore the balance that was lost." The elders fell silent, weighing Adigun's words. Finally, Aya Orun, who had entered the meeting hut behind Adigun, stepped forward. "I believe him," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I have seen the resolve in his eyes, and I know the old stories well. The boy speaks the truth. We must trust him." Her endorsement carried weight, and the elders nodded in agreement. Baba Esu stood up and placed a hand on Adigun's shoulder. "Very well," he said. "We will follow your lead, Adigun. Tell us what must be done." Adigun took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him once more. He quickly outlined the steps of the ritual, explaining the roles that each villager would need to play. The ritual would be performed at the sacred grove, the same place where Adigun had crossed into the underworld. The entire village would gather there, bringing offerings of food, water, and sacred herbs to honor the spirits. The ritual required a sacred chant that Adigun had learned in the underworld, a melody that would call to the earth spirits and ask for their forgiveness. The villagers would need to sing it together, their voices united in a plea for redemption. Finally, Adigun would lead them in the offering of the sacred herbs, a gesture that symbolized the renewal of their covenant with the spirits. The preparations began immediately. The villagers, despite their weakened state, worked with renewed energy, gathering the necessary items and making their way to the sacred grove. Word spread quickly, and by midday, every man, woman, and child in Oke-Aja had assembled in the grove, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. Adigun stood before the ancient tree, the same one that had marked the entrance to the underworld. He looked out at the gathered villagers, feeling a surge of emotion as he realized how much they were relying on him. The weight of their expectations was heavy, but it also gave him strength. "People of Oke-Aja," Adigun began, his voice carrying across the grove. "We stand here today to restore the balance that was lost, to to renew the covenant that our ancestors made with the spirits of the land. The earth has provided for us for generations, and now it is our turn to honor that bond. He began to chant the sacred words, his voice rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath their feet. Slowly, the villagers joined in, their voices blending into a harmonious chorus that filled the grove with a hauntingly beautiful melody. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, and the ground beneath their feet hummed in response. As the chant reached its peak, Adigun signaled for the villagers to bring forth the offerings. They laid out the food, water, and sacred herbs at the base of the ancient tree, their movements precise and deliberate. The air was thick with anticipation as Adigun stepped forward with the final offering, a bundle of sacred herbs wrapped in a cloth that Oren had prepared. Adigun knelt before the tree and placed the bundle on the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He closed his eyes and began the final incantation, the words flowing from his lips with a power that seemed to come from deep within him. O spirits of the earth, we come before you with humility and reverence. We offer these gifts in the name of our ancestors, and we ask for your forgiveness. Restore the balance, lift the curse, and let our land be fertile once more. As the last words left his lips, a gust of wind swept through the grove, stirring the leaves and causing the offerings to rustle. The villagers gasped as they felt a shift in the air, a tangible change that sent shivers down their spines. The ground beneath the ancient tree began to glow with a soft, golden light, spreading out in a circle that encompassed the entire grove. The light grew brighter, illuminating the faces of the villagers, who watched in awe as the glow seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their hearts. Adigun felt a surge of energy pass through him, as though the earth itself was responding to the ritual. The light intensified, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving the grove in a serene silence. The villagers stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened, but Adigun knew. He could feel it in the air, in the very ground beneath his feet. The curse had been lifted. The earth spirits had heard their plea and accepted their offerings. Slowly, the villagers began to notice the change. The leaves on the trees, which had been dull and lifeless, were now vibrant and green. The air, once heavy and stifling, was now fresh and invigorating. And in the distance, they could hear the faint sound of birds singing, a sign that life was returning to the land. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a sound of pure joy and relief. The villagers embraced one another, tears streaming down their faces as they realized that they had been saved. The crops would grow again, the sickness would fade, and Oke-Aja would thrive once more. Adigun stood at the center of it all, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He had done it. He had saved his village. But he knew that the journey was far from over. The ritual had restored the balance, but it was up to the villagers to maintain it. They would need to honor the covenant with the spirits, to remember the lessons of the past, and to ensure that the bond with the earth remained strong. As the villagers began to make their way back to the village, Adigun lingered for a moment in the grove, his gaze fixed on the ancient tree. He felt a presence beside him, and when he turned, he saw the spirit of the old man standing there, his expression one of approval. "You have done well, Adigun," the spirit said, his voice soft and kind. "You have proven yourself worthy of the gift you possess. Remember what you have learned, and use your knowledge wisely." "I will," Adigun replied, his voice filled with determination. "I will not forget." The spirit nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "The spirits will always be with you, Adigun. You are the bridge between the living and the dead. Never forget that." With those words, the spirit faded into the mist, leaving Adigun alone in the grove. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his responsibilities settle on him once more. But this time, he felt ready. As he turned to leave, Adigun knew that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a boy from Oke-Aja. He was the man who could speak to the dead, the keeper of ancient knowledge, and the protector of his village. And with that knowledge came a new sense of purpose. Adigun would dedicate his life to ensuring that Oke-Aja remained in harmony with the spirits, that the balance between the living and the dead was maintained. He would teach the next generation the importance of the old ways so that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. With a final glance at the ancient tree, Adigun began the walk back to the village, his heart full of hope for the future. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the land. And as he walked, Adigun knew that Oke-Aja would prosper once more. The village had been saved, and a new era of peace and prosperity was about to begin. Feeling the weight of his responsibilities settle on him once more. But this time he felt ready. As he turned to leave, Adigun knew that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a boy from Oke-Aja. He was the man who could speak to the dead, the keeper of ancient knowledge, and the protector of his village. And with that knowledge came a new sense of purpose. Adigun would dedicate his life to ensuring that Oke-Aja remained in harmony with the spirits, that the balance between the living and the dead was maintained. He would teach the next generation the importance of the old ways so that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. With a final glance at the ancient tree, Adigun began the walk back to the village, his heart full of hope for the future. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the land. And as he walked, Adigun knew that Oke-Aja would prosper once more. The village had been saved. In the days that followed the ritual, Oke-Aja began to heal. The village, once teetering on the brink of collapse, slowly returned to life. The crops that had withered now sprouted new growth, their vibrant green shoots a testament to the restored balance. The sickness that had gripped the villagers began to fade, and soon, laughter returned to the once silent huts. The village buzzed with renewed energy, a sense of hope permeating every corner. Chapter 5: The Legacy of Adigun. In the days that followed the ritual, Oke-Aja began to heal. The village, once teetering on the brink of collapse, slowly returned to life. The crops that had withered now sprouted new growth, their vibrant green shoots a testament to the restored balance. The sickness that had gripped the villagers began to fade, and soon laughter returned to the once silent huts. The village buzzed with renewed energy, a sense of hope permeating every corner. Adigun, however, did not rest on his laurels. Though the curse had been lifted, he knew that the true challenge lay in maintaining the harmony that had been restored. The ritual was not a one-time solution, but the beginning of a lifelong commitment to honoring the spirits and the land. Adigun took it upon himself to guide the village in this new era, sharing the knowledge he had gained from the underworld with those who would listen. He began by gathering the village's youth, teaching them the sacred chants, the rituals, and the stories of their ancestors. He showed them the importance of respecting the earth, of understanding that the land was not merely a resource to be exploited, but a living entity with which they were in a sacred partnership. The children listened with wide eyes, their minds soaking up the wisdom that Adigun imparted, and in them, he saw the future of Oke-Aja, a future where the old ways were not forgotten but cherished. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the village in a warm, golden glow, Adigun sat with Iya Orun outside her hut. The old woman, who had been his guide and mentor, looked at him with pride in her eyes. "You have done well, Adigun," she said, her voice soft and filled with affection. "The village owes its life to you." Adigun shook his head modestly. "It was the spirits who showed me the way. I was just the one who listened." "That is precisely why you have succeeded," Iya Orun replied. "You listened when others would not. You respected the old ways when others had forgotten them. That is a rare gift, and it will serve you well in the years to come." Adigun nodded, but his mind was already on the future. "I want to make sure that the village never forgets again. We cannot afford to lose our connection with the spirits. I want to establish a tradition, a yearly ceremony where we honor the earth and renew our covenant with the spirits. It will remind us of what is truly important." Iya Orun smiled, a twinkle of approval in her eyes. "A wise idea, Adigun. The spirits will be pleased, and the village will be stronger for it." With Iya Orun's guidance, Adigun set about organizing the first of these ceremonies. The entire village gathered once more in the sacred grove, this time not in desperation but in celebration. The ceremony was a joyous occasion, filled with music, dancing, and offerings to the spirits. Adigun led the villagers in the same chant that had lifted the curse, and as their voices rose together, there was a palpable sense of unity. a feeling that the village was truly one with the land. The ceremony became an annual tradition, a cornerstone of life in Oke-Aja. Each year, as the harvest season approached, the villagers would gather in the sacred grove to give thanks to the spirits and to reaffirm their commitment to living in harmony with the earth. The younger generation, who had been taught by Adigun, took pride in leading the ceremonies, ensuring that the knowledge was passed down from one generation to the next. As the years passed, Adigun grew from a boy into a respected leader. His wisdom and connection to the spirits became legendary, not just in Oke-Aja, but in the surrounding villages as well. People from far and wide came to seek his counsel, and he became known as the man who could speak to the dead, a title that he wore with humility and grace. Yet despite the reverence he garnered, Adigun remained humble. He lived simply, always mindful of the lessons he had learned in the underworld. He never sought power for its own sake, but used his influence to protect and guide his people, ensuring that they never strayed from the path of balance and respect for the natural world. As he grew older, Adigun began to pass on his responsibilities to the next generation. He took on apprentices, young men and women who showed the same sensitivity to the spirits and the land that he had. He taught them everything he knew, preparing them to carry on the work that he had started. Among them was a young boy named Obafemi, who showed a natural talent for communicating with the spirits and a deep reverence for the old ways. Adigun saw in Obafemi the same spark that had once been kindled in him, and he knew that the village would be in good hands when his time came to an end. One evening, many years after that fateful journey to the underworld, Adigun stood once more in the sacred grove, now much older and wiser. The village was prosperous, the fields abundant, and the people happy. The annual ceremony had just concluded, and Adigun watched as the villagers laughed and celebrated, their faces alight with joy. Iya Orun had passed on years ago, but her spirit seemed to linger in the grove, watching over them all. Adigun could feel her presence, a comforting warmth that made him smile. As the festivities wound down and the villagers began to make their way back to their homes, Adigun lingered behind, savoring the peace of the grove. He closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the forest, the rustling of the leaves, the distant call of a bird. He felt the presence of the spirits, always close, always watching. "Thank you," Adigun whispered, his words carried away by the gentle breeze, "for guiding me, for showing me the way." A soft rustle of leaves was the only response, but Adigun knew that the spirits had heard him. With a final look at the ancient tree that had marked the beginning of his journey, Adigun turned and walked back to the village. His steps were slower now. His body no longer as strong as it once was, but his heart was full. He knew that he had fulfilled his purpose, that the village was safe and would continue to thrive long after he was gone. As he returned to his hut, Adigun felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The man who could speak to the dead had done what he was meant to do, and now, as the night closed in, he was ready to rest. Oke-Aja, the village he had saved, would continue to prosper, its people living in harmony with the spirits and the land, guided by the wisdom of their ancestors. And Adigun's legacy would live on, a reminder of the power of the old ways and the importance of balance in all things.